Good afternoon and welcome to yet another event from the LSE South Asia Centre. My name is Nilanjan Sarkar and I'm the Deputy Director of the Centre here at the London School of Economics. Thank you everyone for joining us live on Facebook. I'm delighted to come live today with the second in our series of events, Geopolitics Beyond Borders. It's a series of events that we are doing in collaboration with LSE IDEAS and the International Institute for Strategic Studies here in the London School of Economics. The series was conceived sometime last summer, last autumn, because Rahul Roy Chaudhary, who I'm going to introduce right now, and Professor Christopher Alden at LSE IDEAS and I had a discussion about how it was important that we have a series of discussions on the changing nature of geopolitics and geostrategy in South Asia, in the region as a whole, in individual countries in relation to one another, for a variety of reasons, but very significantly because of the increasing presence and importance of China in the region, in South Asia. As a result, in Mickelman's term, we had an event that focused on China in particular, the recording of which is available on the South Asia Centre's website, and a working paper of which will be available very soon. Before I go on to introduce our panelists today, this is for the benefit of those who are watching us on Facebook. If you would like to ask a question, please post the question on Facebook. The question will be asked anonymously, because if this were to be an on-site event, then LSE gives the questioner the right to remain anonymous and ask a question without revealing their name. So we will track the questions on Facebook and post your questions without revealing your name. You are very welcome to ask a question to a particular speaker. You're also welcome to pose a question to the complete audience. If you would like to tweet, please tag the LSE South Asia Centre at SAsiaLSE. I am now delighted to introduce our speakers one by one, and I'll take the very safe route of introducing them alphabetically by their surname. Husain Haqqani is Director for South and Central Asia and Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, and amongst several other accomplishments was Pakistan's Ambassador to the United States from 2008 to 2011. Daniel Markey is Senior Research Professor in International Relations at Johns Hopkins University. And between 2007 and 2015, Daniel was Senior Fellow for India, Pakistan, and South Asia at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. And for all of you who have been to New York and know the Council, you must also know that it's housed in one of the most beautiful buildings over there. Rani Mullen is Associate Professor of Government at the College of William and Mary. Her specialism is Afghanistan and India, particularly her focus of research as well as interest on these two countries in particular. And in 2013 and 14, she was Fulbright Nehru Senior Fellow at the Afghanistan Studies Center, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, is the only such center focused on Afghanistan in India. This one is at the Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi. Last but certainly not the least, I'm delighted to introduce Rahul Roy Chaudhary, who's Senior Fellow for South Asia at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. And once again, to mention that this event is in collaboration with the International Institute for Strategic Studies. And Rahul will come in after the speakers have made their initial comments. We've decided in advance that Rani will speak first, followed by Husain, and then Daniel. And the agreed topic is different stars, different stripes, the US in South Asia. Rani.
Thank you so much to both of you, Dr. Sarkar at LSE and Dr. Roy Chaudhary at IISS. Really appreciate you both putting this very timely panel together. Timely also because if the 19th century was the British century and the 20th the American, one says that the 21st is going to be the Asian century, and a big role that will be played there will be played by South Asia. So we were tasked with reflecting on the last 8 years of American foreign policy towards South Asia and thinking about the next 4 years of the new Biden administration and how that policy what it might look like and how it might evolve. And I wanted to make 4 main points while having this reflection, 4 sort of takeaways that I got from reflecting on these issues. One was, of course, the elephant in the room, which is China. And US foreign policy has increasingly been driven by competition with China, with an impact, of course, on its policy with the South Asia region. This will continue to be the case, that China looms largely in foreign policy with other parts of the world as well. And it will continue to be an overarching driver of American competition engagement, the US China policy, also with an eye to focused on having friendlier relations to counter an increasingly aggressive China. So I would predict that the Biden administration, much as the previous administrations, will continue to engage with South Asia on its own terms, but also with an eye to what's happening in China. Second, when reflecting on the past 8 years and looking at forward to the next 4 years, I think we are definitely going to see the US be a more consistent ally in the whole region. While US competition with China and how it navigates that relationship is a commonality that US shares with many South Asian countries, and while this issue represents a continuity from previous administrations, how Biden deals with the China challenge will change from the policy under Trump. While Obama engaged with all South Asian countries, under Trump, we saw a closer relationship between the Indian Prime Minister Modi and Trump, but Trump was far from an alliance builder in the region and really in his foreign policy more generally. His policy towards South Asia and elsewhere was erratic. I think that's sort of the kindest way maybe to put it. Biden, I think we know, has vowed to restore US alliances and global leadership while promoting democracy. And all of this will mean that we will have a more consistent and a more predictable US engagement in South Asia, and one which will focus on working with allies. Third, I think the US policy will continue to focus largely on 2 countries in the region. As has been the case these past 8 years, within South Asia, I would say we will likely see Biden continue to focus disproportionately on Afghanistan and India. There's, of course, the new focus on Myanmar, driven by the recent events of the past couple of weeks. But by and large, in terms of what it means for US relationship in other parts of the world, and also US troops obviously on the ground in Afghanistan. So that I think these 2 countries will continue to loom largely. Fourth, I would say that we're likely to see a focus on 2 themes that, it's been clear that the Biden administration has clearly set out that environmental issues as well as democracy promotion is going to be at the forefront of the agenda, more so than it has been these past 8 years, and certainly more than it has been these past 4 years. With regard to climate change, maybe I'll take the little bit easier one first. Climate change is an opportunity for engagement between South Asian countries and the US because they share a common concern. Global warming and environmental degradation is having a huge impact on South Asian countries. We recently saw the hanging glacier that broke off in the Indian Himalayas, triggering a deadly flood. or the floods in Bangladesh of last summer. Well, millions lost everything. So it's clearly an issue that every country in South Asia is concerned about. And I think they'll find quite, good reception, because Biden has clearly made this an issue that's front and center of his foreign policy agenda, as well as domestic agenda. So I think there's a common opportunity to work together from Afghanistan all the way to Myanmar. But Biden's also made clear that he will focus on democracy promotion, which is a more divisive, potentially divisive issue in the relationship between the US and South Asia. So democracy promotion back under Biden, after, I would say, sort of a mid-level focus under Obama and little to no focus under the Trump administration. We have, as you know, seen recent democratic backsliding in many South Asian countries, where we've seen in many different countries a stifling of the media, a stifling of media, as well as descending political parties and individuals over the past years. Most notably has, of course, and perhaps most drastically, the events of the last couple of weeks under the recent military crackdown in Myanmar against a democratically elected leader. But there are other countries also. So I think this is going to be a source of tension, Biden's engagement with South Asia. With regard to a country like Myanmar, Biden has already called out on the military government to relinquish their power and ordered sanctions which target the coup leaders. But the question on how this democracy focus will impact the relationship with India, I think, is a question mark. And of course, we've seen some democratic backsliding in India also, right, over the past years. So, what can we expect there? I think that's a little bit trickier issue. Biden recently had a phone call with Modi where they discussed Myanmar, and I think that is an indication that in the end, when it comes to India, strategic interests, especially vis-a-vis China, will trump democracy promotion. Finally, and I know I'm almost, or perhaps already over my time limit, but just a couple words about Afghanistan, which is an area that I have focused quite a bit on. I think the past there's really been quite a bit of continuity in US foreign policy over the past years, in that the focus has been to get our troops, US troops, out of Afghanistan. Obama, despite the troop surge under his administration, Trump, and now Biden have all wanted troops out from Afghanistan. But Biden is in a serious quandary, right, with regard to the troop withdrawal by the deadline of May 1st. Under the February 2020 deal negotiated by the Trump administration, they had agreed to essentially withdraw all international troops by May 1st in exchange for security guarantees from the Taliban and a commitment to peace talks. But the Trump administration gave away any leverage that the Afghan government had to negotiate with the Taliban by pressuring the Afghan government to release over 5,000 Taliban prisoners, including proven terrorists. The current situation is really dire. There's hardly a day that goes by without a terrorist attack, which are not claimed by the Taliban, but where intelligence agencies of different countries have clear indications of involvement of the Taliban, and frankly, often supported by neighboring countries. The Taliban also has not disavowed al-Qaeda. It has been making huge territorial gains in Afghanistan, and the talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government in Doha have hardly progressed. So Biden is faced with a stark choice of pulling out US troops by the May 1 deadline, which would lead to the collapse, I'm quite sure, of the Afghan state, or keep troops past the deadline due to Taliban violations of at the minimum, the spirit of the courts, which will then lead to further attacks on international troops. So a very difficult choice, likely knowing Biden, he's a deal maker and he strongly believes in diplomacy. He will use diplomatic channels with South Asian countries and other countries to pressure the Taliban to try and decrease violence, come and negotiate while keeping US troops at a minimal level. But we will see. So sorry for going a little bit over time, but those were my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rani. That was excellent. I'm going to ask Husain Haqqani to speak now, but just before that, quite a few people have joined in since Rani started speaking. So this is for the benefit of the audience. If you would like to ask questions, please do post them on Facebook and we'll ask them to the speakers. Husain, sir, please speak.
Let me begin by saying that South Asia is, of course, one of the world's most populous regions, therefore a potential market for international producers. It has 2 nuclear-armed countries, and therefore we all expect that it will be an important country in the policy of one of the world's superpowers. Yet, we have always seen that the United States, in making a hierarchy of priorities for its attention, does not always put South Asia at the top. And therefore, it was no surprise that when President Biden gave his first foreign policy speech recently, he spoke about Myanmar in the context of democratic backsliding and human rights violations, but he did not really talk about the rest of South Asia. And that basically is a reflection of the current reality of American politics. President Biden has a lot of healing to do at home. He has to rebuild the post-pandemic economy. He has to reestablish America's alliances with European powers that are frayed and with East Asian powers. Also, historically, in the American grand strategy, South Asia was not a priority area of contention during the Cold War either. Pakistan became important as part of the northern tier of containment of the Soviet Union. And of course, that reached its peak during the war against the Soviets by the Mujahideen from 1979 to 89. The United States likes to have economic, cultural, diplomatic and political relations with South Asian countries. But in strategic and security terms, the region was not at the same level of priority for American policymakers as, say, for example, Europe was during the Cold War, or Southeast Asia, or even the Middle East. Part of it is, of course, an economic reality. If we look at US trade figures, India is the 9th largest trading partner for the United States, but it accounts for $143 billion of trade volume, which in the bigger scheme of things at a $5 trillion trade economy is not really that big. Now, after that dampener, let's come to the more positive aspects of how I think the US will focus or is focused on South Asia. So let's divide it into spheres. First, let's take the strategic and security concerns. I think just as the northern tier of containment drew Pakistan into an alliance with the United States, or America into alliance with Pakistan during the Cold War, the focus on the Indo-Pacific strategy will make India more and more important to the United States. It will then depend upon how India plays its cards. Now, South Asians generally like bilateralism and do not always give in to their allies' concerns. The US found that out with Pakistan. I have a feeling it is going to find out that with India as a number of divergences emerge. At the moment, there are 3 important areas of convergence for Indian and American interests. One, of course, is China. India has its own disputes with China that makes it more focused on China than it would have been willing to have been during the Cold War. Climate change is another issue of concern to India, and that is also an issue of concern to the Biden administration, as Rani Mullen rightly pointed out. And lastly, I think that India is interested in building the Quad, finally, the 4 countries that would ensure Indo-Pacific strategy. So that would be Australia, Japan, the United States, and India. And I think that that is also going to be a US priority and would have been a US priority irrespective of who was elected in 2020. However, just as Pakistan tried very hard during the Cold War to try and draw the United States into its disputes with India on its side, meaning Pakistan's side, because it was an ally, we will see that India will also try to draw the United States more onto its side in trying to make Pakistan give up certain policies in relation to India. That might not necessarily play out the way New Delhi might want, but that is something that will likely happen. Similarly, we will also see that in terms of commitments under security agreements and arrangements, the Indians would like to have strategic autonomy. And the American general attitude in terms of global strategy has been to try and make more formalized alliances for military purposes. So that may be an issue on which India and the US may diverge, even though they will continue to have a shared interest and will continue to work together. That said, let's move on to the area of economic and cultural relations. I think that they will continue to flourish, but in the bigger scheme of things, I already pointed out the numbers. India will have to up its game, give greater market access. If it does not, then we will see a lot more complaining. It may not be the kind of complaining that we saw during the Trump era, because this will not be government by tweet. Therefore, there will be fewer things that will come out in the open, but the American side would like greater American investment in India. And in fact, historically, American interest in a particular region has always been determined by the level of its investments and its trade with a certain region. So if India can increase the level of American economic interest, it will also enhance the level of American strategic commitment to India. Pakistan has to figure this one out finally. For a country that was an ally of America for half a century, Pakistan's trade and cultural and other relations with the United States are minimal. Compare 143 billion in trade with between India and the United States last year to 6.5 billion between Pakistan and the United States. There have been a few writers who have said that in the future, Pakistan and the United States should focus on economic and cultural cooperation since they cannot have a strategic alliance anymore. They may want to reconsider that, because if that is the case, Pakistan's trade volume with the United States is at the same level as Morocco's trade volume with the United States. And the level of American political investment in a relationship with Morocco is probably not going to be that acceptable to Islamabad. On Afghanistan, I think that the situation is becoming clearer. The Biden administration will certainly not commit large number of troops to Afghanistan. It runs against President Biden's core instincts. But at the same time, I think that the cut and run that was being executed by the Trump administration is not going to be executed now. And so the Taliban will be told that we are willing to talk to you, but we will talk to you only if you actually do certain things. What was done under the Trump administration was to basically give up all leverage with the Taliban, but not only that, sign an agreement, the letter of which did not put any conditions on the Taliban except one, which was that they will break relations with Al-Qaeda. And again, there was no monitoring mechanism for that. So I think that there will be a renegotiation of the Doha agreement. And if the Taliban refuse, there will be a little escalation of fighting. But I have always put more faith in the Afghan national security forces than others have done. My argument is that the reason why the Afghan national security forces have not been up to par is because they haven't had the time to create top leadership. It takes about 40 years for a second lieutenant to become a general. At the moment, they are somewhere midway during that process. They have good fighters, but that does not mean they have good leadership. And also, developing of esprit de corps, etc., takes a long time. So they will need some support during that process. And I think the Biden administration will be willing to provide that minimal support. There's a lot of internal problems of Afghanistan that need to be resolved. let us see how the Afghan leadership is able to do that, if at all. Lastly, let me say that there is the basket of what I call diplomatic and political relations. Many years ago, a very senior American diplomat who had dealt with South Asia for 30 years of his career said to me that American diplomats find South Asians high maintenance interlocutors. What he meant by that was that for the time, energy, and resources that American diplomats have to allocate to get something done from South Asians, and that goes across the board, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, that for that time and energy, the results they get are in comparable terms less than what they would get for the same time of same allocation of time, energy, and resources. South Asians talk a lot more, they engage a lot more, they have many more levels and multiple layers of dialogue, and yet they often stand their own ground and quietly go ahead and vote the way they wanted to do in the UN anyway, because they have other relationships to take into account. I don't think that is going to change, and I think the Biden administration will be a lot more tolerant about it from, say, India than it would be from, say, Pakistan, depending on how it feels towards them. Yet, I don't think that this will be a zero-sum game. I think the Biden administration will still remain engaged with Pakistan, albeit at a different level of intensity than we have seen in the past. I think I would also like to say a few things about the smaller South Asian countries, whether it's Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. I think that the Biden administration's renewed emphasis on human rights and on democracy will mean that the unchecked backsliding of democracy in all South Asian countries, and that also applies to the larger countries, that will not go at least unremarked about, if not unchecked. There's very little the US might be able to do about certain things. I don't see sanctions coming anytime soon on, say, for example, India or even Pakistan on democratic issues, but there will be a lot more said than was said during the preceding 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Husain Haqqani. I have absolutely no doubt that somewhere along the way you will see a tweet which says Husain Haqqani says South Asians talk a lot. Daniel Markey, please speak now.
Thank you, and thanks for including me on the panel. It's great to see my fellow panelists. I appreciate the invitation. I'm going to start with a bit of a backward look, looking at some of the continuity and change in the US-India relationship. And most of what I'm going to talk about really will focus not on South Asia broadly, but on India in particular. And I think if we even go back, certainly to the Clinton administration, we definitely see significant continuity across every presidential administration in the United States in terms of positive views toward India and hope and aspiration for improved ties throughout that period. And that's important to appreciate because that hasn't always been the truth in the US-India relationship. We've also seen that the nature of the relationship has been founded on, as we say often here, kind of a three-legged stool, a political leg, an economic leg that sometimes includes climate and related topics, and a strategic leg. And each, although there has been continuity since Clinton, each of the US administrations working with its Indian counterparts has tended to emphasize a different part of those legs of the stool. So if we go back to Clinton, I think principally was driven, an outreach to India driven in large part by an economic logic, a sense that there were great opportunities to be gained by working more closely with an enormous market like India, unrealized opportunities. Now, some of that ambition, there was cold water thrown on that by India's nuclear tests, which was a bit of a setback. So when the Bush administration came in, its emphasis with India picked back up some of the similar logic, but then at least at the outset, prior to 9/11, really focused more on the strategic rationale of the relationship. And even at that early date, was seeing India in the context as a counterweight to China. The early Bush administration, had it been left to its own devices with no 9/11, I think really would have emphasized the strategic competition with China above a number of other aims. Obviously, that was also sidetracked by 9/11, by the war in Afghanistan, and then Iraq. But even so, progress with India was made, principally, if we recall back to that point, on the civil nuclear agenda, which had a kind of a strategic rationale to it, but also a civilian and economic potential to it. And all the way through, if we recall, dehyphenation became a buzzword, an effort to think about India on its own terms, to build up ties with India, and then simultaneously to work with Pakistan separately in this post 9/11 context when the war in Afghanistan and the concerns about counterterrorism loomed so large in the American calculation. That was achieved to some significant level, even by the Bush administration, into the Obama administration. And that's where I think we probably saw the greatest convergence of progress across all three legs of this stool. Under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, President Obama had a good partner, a partner who was increasingly open to the prospects of working with the United States on a strategic agenda, even though he had some risk aversion to picking fights with China. He was open to greater possibilities and saw the benefits of closer ties with the United States on the economic front. And both sides could point to each other as being a critical democratic, a natural partner because of their shared democratic practices and history and institutions. When Modi came into office, while Obama was still there, new questions were fairly quickly raised about the political foundations of the relationship and concerns in Washington about seeing Narendra Modi come into power. But these, I think, were also fairly quickly pushed aside by an Obama administration that at that point wanted to emphasize the strategic logic of the relationship with India and was willing to overlook, in most instances, Modi's past history. During the Trump administration, that's when we see kind of the turn of the wheel. And we really see a relationship that is critically focused on defense and security relations with India, with leaving both politics and economics more and more to the side. Economic protectionism by both sides, practiced by both sides, created opportunities for more friction than cooperation or opportunity. Populist tendencies, both by Modi and by Trump, may have brought the two men together in a kind of a tactical alliance of political convenience, but were not rooted in a shared recognition or appreciation for democratic principles. And so that left defense cooperation, moving forward on the so-called foundational agreements in defense and security cooperation between the two sides, pushing forward with arms sales, with joint exercises. In all of these areas, significant progress was made under the Trump administration. And so that leaves Biden now, who inherits, I think, a strong, perhaps even outsized security relationship with India, with questionable political and economic foundations at this point. And that will continue to be true. And we will have to see how, and I think my fellow panelists have already pointed this out, how the administration, the Biden administration, will square its desire to emphasize the defense of democracy, both at home and internationally, and to pursue human rights at home and internationally, these types of issues, with its relations with New Delhi under Narendra Modi, having seen what India has pursued over the past several years in Kashmir and elsewhere. And it's also not clear how US trade and economic policies are likely to shape up, not just with India, but across Asia, because we can't simply return, and neither has the Biden administration signaled that it wishes to return, back to a Obama-era Trans-Pacific Partnership agenda. Something new has to be pursued, and it is unclear at this point, to my eye, what that's likely to be, and even more unclear whether India would be a part of that agenda or would want to be a part of that agenda. So a lot of big question marks there. There are also, so that's kind of the broad contours of US-India relations over time and at the present. But if we look at the current moment, we can see that there are some specific challenges facing the Biden team out of the gate. Both of my prior panelists have talked about Afghanistan, about Biden facing not a good choice between bad and terrible or bad and worse. But the one piece that I would also flag related to the US-India relationship is how the decisions that the United States makes for Afghanistan will have knock-on effects in India, both with respect to India's sense of its own security, which would deteriorate if conditions in Afghanistan deteriorate precipitously, but also in the sense about whether India trusts the United States to take its strategic concerns seriously in the region. And if that is not the case, that is, if the Biden administration does try to leave quickly and leaves Afghanistan, frankly, a mess, India will see that as evidence of the United States, at least in that narrow context, not taking its concerns as seriously as it would like. So that's one piece, the Afghanistan piece. One a little further afield is the Iran story. Of course, the Biden administration is going to take a very different approach on Iran as compared to the Trump administration. And there, I think the storyline may be quite different, with India perceiving a softer Biden approach, or at least a more open Biden approach, a return to the JCPOA, as something that India will welcome and will see as an opportunity to shore up or return to its relations with Iran. But the India-Pakistan dynamic is in a number of important ways, not least when measured according to cross-border shelling figures, which are now as bad as they were as when I started in government in about 2003, 2004. We're seeing the worst cross-border shelling since then. It's bad, and beyond that, both India and Pakistan seem to have learned, to my view, precisely the wrong lessons from their recent crises in 2019, both sides perceiving that an escalatory approach to managing a crisis would actually serve their goals. And both sides, I think, are likely, if placed in a similar situation, to perceive that escalating their conflict may be the kind of thing that demonstrates toughness and that they can manage it effectively. And I think there are a number of policymakers and analysts in Washington, D.C. who perceive that that escalatory approach actually runs enormous risks that could land in the lap of a Biden administration, which will find itself having to try to manage those risks in ways that the Trump administration managed to get itself out of, but I don't think acquitted itself terribly well. There's also the added challenge of how to deal with China's role in the region on this narrow issue of India-Pakistan crisis management. Historically, China has urged restraint on Pakistan and to some extent on India as well, and has generally played a helpful role. But in 2019, at least some US policymakers perceived that the Chinese played a less helpful, less constructive role, actually urging Pakistan to stand firm against India and to push the envelope with India in the midst of that crisis in ways that made the United States quite nervous. And so there is a broader problem of managing what could emerge as so-called bloc politics in South Asia, with China increasingly aligned with Pakistan, the United States increasingly aligned with India, and neither of those two sides perceiving that restraint or pulling back from crisis necessarily serves their purposes. So this is a tinderbox that could get considerably worse under Biden. Similarly, the India-China relationship along their shared and contested border is also a tinderbox. Now, fortunately, even just in the past few days, we've seen the two sides pull back from one of the several contested areas on the Pangong Tso Lake area, which is good news, but it does not diminish the practical fact that India and China have come closer to a return to outright military conflict on their border than we've seen in over 40 years. This is obviously problematic from a US perspective, raises a number of questions for the new Biden administration, not least how to manage that potential crisis should it emerge again, sort of crisis management approach, but also what are the steps that Washington is prepared to take to assist India in its conflict with China in ways that allow India to achieve greater confidence, security confidence with respect to China, but without risking immediate escalation or near-term escalation of violence that might actually favor China in the near term, would also avoid a considerable diversion of Indian attention to its land borders with China, which is something that would actually harm US strategic goals of seeing India more active in the Indo-Pacific maritime space, and how also to avoid a kind of a considerable rise in India-China tensions that, at least for the time being, will also hurt India's potential for economic growth, because it is still intertwined economically with China. And that, as a consequence, could hurt India's rise as a major power in the region and the world. So what are the specific tools the United States should bring to bear to help India achieve that confidence along its border and avoid some of these other risks? These are things that will be on the Biden administration's agenda. Finally, as I think Rani pointed out, competition with China is going to be the so-called organizing principle for the Biden administration's global policy, not just in South Asia, but in many other places as well. The Trump administration turned the page from what had been a kind of a hedged approach toward China to a full-out competitive approach. That doesn't mean confrontational necessarily, but it definitely means competition. And the Biden administration will continue with this in, as the other panelists have said, a more focused, disciplined, and consistent way. Now, India is getting a lot of attention already on this, and in particular in the context of the so-called Quad with Japan and Australia. But this also raises an important question for the Biden administration, whether it will find a way to turn that Quad, which so far has been a fairly mid-level talk shop, into a vehicle for more considerable strategic cooperation among its four members, what that will look like, whether that cooperation will extend beyond security or military cooperation into other venues and what those might be. And then last, whether and how the Biden administration will weigh the prioritization of the Quad and India's role in the Quad relative to its more traditional alliances in Asia, to include Japan in the bilateral, Korea in the bilateral, and its relations with ASEAN, which historically have been placed at the center of US responses to strategic issues in Asia. Will India supplant that or become prioritized above that? Or will it return, as I think a number of ASEAN leaders are hoping, will the United States return to an ASEAN first or ASEAN centric view in the region? Now, it's possible we can try to have it all, but ultimately prioritization of time and energy and resources becomes a reality. And I'll leave it here by observing simply that in US-India policy, as in so many other areas, the Biden administration is coming to terms with the fact that even if it wanted to roll back the clock to where we were under the Obama administration, the past 4 years have fundamentally changed the region, and there is no going back. There's no simple way of getting there. It's not worth trying. And so now it's a question of picking up the pieces, and in some narrow instances, building on successes the Trump administration has had, and going forward from there. So I look forward to the conversation. Thanks again for including me on the panel.
Professor Rani, Mullen, Ambassador Husain, Haqqani, Professor Dan Markey, thank you very much for your introductory remarks. These have been highly substantive and hugely policy relevant. Let me start the discussion session by asking Professor Mullen first. And I think, we all noted the points you made, Professor Mullen, in terms of the importance of the Biden administration on environmental climate issues and democracy promotion. But I want to focus your attention more on Afghanistan and the future of Afghanistan and the Biden administration's policy towards Afghanistan. You clearly made the point that the administration is facing a serious quandary in terms of options it has. This was also discussed by the other participants of this seminar. We know that there is an ongoing review that is taking place. But I have two specific questions in relation to this. And the first question is the impact that, that in the eventuality that the Biden administration continues engagement with Afghanistan in terms of troop levels, goes beyond the 1st of May deadline. You mentioned increase in violence in Afghanistan. But in addition to that, what would be the impact, do you think, on the peace process? Would the inter-Afghan negotiating process currently taking place in Doha come to an end? Or would there be a subtle agreement with the Taliban to continue negotiations on the peace process. My second question is the importance that we've seen from the outside of the US administration seeking or attempting to seek a regional approach towards consensus in Afghanistan. What does this regional approach actually mean? And is it possible to bring India and Pakistan on board in a consensual manner in relation to the future of Afghanistan? Professor Mullen, please.
Thank you so much. Those are excellent and very difficult questions that you have posed there. You know, on a continued troop presence, which is, as Ambassador Husain Haqqani also said, the likely sort of middle of the road approach, right, between pulling out totally and, you know, sort of upping the troops, largely sort of the middle of the road approach. I would predict that, you know, the Taliban does have the upper hand in terms of controlling land territory, rural land territory in Afghanistan in particular. And they have had little incentive to negotiate right now. On the other hand, it's also important to point out that there more NATO troops, more non-US troops in Afghanistan than US troops, sorry. And increasingly NATO has been under discussion in terms of what to do, you know, how to work the alliance, how to, because of course they're also worried what impact this might have if we see a return to civil war, what kind of flows of refugees this might lead to Europe's border. We saw this happen a few years ago. So I would predict that violence would go up, because if the US does not meet the May 1 deadline, the Taliban have continued to be involved in terrorist activity in Afghanistan, and they will just up that game, and they will say that attacks on international troops, because the US didn't abide by the agreement, that part is off the table, and there will be attacks on international troops. What this means for the larger peace process is, I think, that it would be even more important, turning to your second question, for the US to work on a regional approach. That's really the only way out, right? And obviously this will include countries like India, who, as several of the other speakers have pointed out, that from India's perspective, the impact on Indian security has increased when Afghanistan has been unstable. So during the period of the Taliban, where the Indian Airlines was hijacked, et cetera, right? So not to mention the whole Kashmir issue. So India is, I think, quite keen on engagement. So is Iran, actually. And I think so it's a very complex issue, but I think it will tie into a changing approach under Biden to Iran, which will open up possibilities for Afghanistan as well as India. India has invested significant funds in Chabahar port. All of that is on hold because US policy and sanctions on countries that are investing in trading, et cetera, with Iran. So I think that this will lead the US to push for a regional approach, and that regional approach will include engaging with China, which has significant influence on Pakistan also with regard to Afghanistan. So I would predict that we would see the US under Biden say that the Taliban has essentially violated the agreements, is not leading to a decrease in violence, and that they don't pull out troops by May 1. We will then see an escalation of violence. It will, of course, also be the summer months, so you generally have an increase in violence during those times, but I think we will see violence on international troops. NATO is already talking about this issue, how to better coordinate, how to put increasing pressure. And I think it will lead to, if we really want to have a solution, we need to, by we, I mean the American government, needs to bring in allies in the region, needs to be a coordinated approach, because the bottom line is that under the current conditions, everybody's cutting their own deal. Everybody's talking on the sidelines with the Taliban and trying to sort of preempt what people see happening on the ground there. But it's in everybody's long-term political and economic interest to have stability in Afghanistan. So if we can really work on a regional approach, it would in the longer run be a win-win for all countries involved. But the hurdles to really getting a regional deal are in fact quite high.
Thank you, Professor Mullen. Ambassador Haqqani, you correctly noted that South Asia was not a priority for the US administration, and we heard that in other parts of the webinar as well. But I'd like to focus my questions to you in relation to Pakistan. And there are two questions. The first is in terms of the regional approach that I'd asked Professor Rani Mullen. And in the regional approach, clearly the sense would be for countries in the region to work together as best as possible for the future of Afghanistan. But also, clearly, there would be a strong element in terms of seeking Pakistani support for more action and influence over the Taliban that more than that is currently being carried out. Our contacts in Pakistan tell us that that will not be possible from the Pakistani side, that they've done as much as they could by bringing in the Taliban to the negotiating table in Doha. So the first question to you is, how do you incentivize or de-incentivize Pakistan to provide a more proactive approach in relation to the Taliban? And the second question related to this is in fact the China question. Over the last few years, we've seen a growing relationship between Pakistan and China. Our interlocutors in Pakistan tell us that this is the new nature of the relationship that Pakistan has, its strongest relationship. And it's not about to get this influenced by the American administration. And the American administration needs to see Pakistan as supportive of the agenda in Washington, but not at the cost of its relations with China. Would this be possible at all in a policy sense?
Sorry, you need to have your to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. For the first question, I would refer you to the definition of insanity, which is to do the same thing again and again, thinking that it will bring new results. Since 1992, that effort has been made. Since the collapse of the Najib government, Pakistan has a very specific view of what it wants to see in Afghanistan. It wants to cooperate with others as long as it brings about that specific end into effect. They cooperated with the Trump administration because they thought that they were near that point. They would bring the Taliban to the table, the Americans would agree to leave, and then eventually Pakistan, being the big reality next door to Afghanistan, would play a role, and the Afghan settlement, intra-Afghan settlement, would defer to Pakistan's concerns more than anybody else. That didn't turn out the way the Pakistanis had expected. I don't think that they have the capacity or the will right now to do more. Because what that would entail would be to actually turn on the Taliban. I mean, the Taliban leadership is in Pakistan. Pakistan brought them to the negotiating table in Doha. Pakistan could arrest them, could put them on trial, do whatever but those are not options that Pakistan would like to exercise because of its impact on its own domestic situation, although And that's what the Pakistani leadership feels. So as far as the Pakistanis are concerned, they think that they have done their best. And so everybody else either has to accept that best or come up with a solution that does not require them, A, to do more, and B, to take responsibility for the outcome in Afghanistan. As far as the so-called regional solution is concerned, look, it's a great thing for people to meet in Shanghai and discuss Afghanistan, or meet in Kazakhstan and discuss Afghanistan, meet in Moscow, and that's all been done. It's been done multiple times each year since 1992. The basic reality of Afghanistan has to be understood. Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic, multi-tribal society that had a kind of stability that was through a form of minimal centralized government, and any attempt to try and build a highly centralized government that only favors one ethnicity or one particular ideology will be very difficult. It will be difficult for the Taliban. It was difficult for the communists. So what you have to have is some kind of give and take. People can call it patronage-based quasi-democracy, but that's how it is going to work out. So the question for negotiators with the Taliban should have been how to bring the Taliban round to participating in that give and take rather than imposing on that give and take. That wasn't done. Can it be done now? We'll see. As to the second question, Pakistan is very close to China. Pakistan does not want to abandon all relations with the United States. That's why it supports the idea of an economic, cultural, long-term engagement. It doesn't want to be bypassed completely. It doesn't want to be ignored. And I think they have a point there. That said, will they, if the crunch comes and they have to choose between China and the United States, will they choose the United States? I don't think so. So that, I think, is also exactly what your interlocutors have told. Look, here's the problem. International relations, and especially the realist school in international relations, always argued that you have to see the world as it is. But we all keep making exceptions for certain countries and certain governments and think that because once or twice or a few times they made certain compromises in return for certain incentives, they will keep doing that. Pakistan has a very specific view of its national security. It sees India as an existential threat to its existence. It feels that Pakistan's own internal dynamic is weak, and that the various ethnicities and regional groupings are actually, they feel tempted to be exploited by outside elements, whether it's Afghanistan or India. And so for them, the very specific way of ensuring security is to keep a very strong military, to keep dissent within the country under control, and to keep an air of constant adversarial relationship with India alive. If they were to change that, that would have to come from within. I think any amount of external incentivizing only enables them to prolong that. They get more resources to keep doing what they are already doing rather than to change what they are doing. And so eventually Pakistan has to figure out, is its priority really economic? If its priority is really economic, then there are certain things they will have to stop doing. There'll be certain things they'll have to start doing. But all of that will be an internal Pakistani process. I think the era of foreign incentives to try and make Pakistan change its strategic priorities, I think that should be over by now.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Haqqani. Let me now turn to Professor Dan Markey. Professor Markey, you talked about the continuity in the US's relations with India through several administrations, which is absolutely correct. But at the same time, we saw that with the Trump administration, as you yourself pointed out, there was a clear focus on defense and security issues. We saw the various foundational agreements being signed, 2+2 meetings of ministers of defense and foreign affairs taking place, even at the time of the pandemic with the last administration, the Trump administration. But at the same time, as you mentioned, there are concerns over the issues of democracy promotion. And there was a very good analysis, a very sober analysis coming out from Delhi a week ago by a former Deputy National Security Advisor of India, Dr. Arvind Gupta, who really said in his piece that India should experience, and I'm quoting from it, should expect US pressure on climate change, trade, and over domestic issues. So the first question to you is, to what extent will India's strong defense relations be able to mitigate some of the expected pressures by Washington on India on the domestic issues, including trade and climate change? To what extent will the balance be there? I mean, would it be really the nature of the relationship between the Pentagon and the State Department, and where the White House comes into it? The second question is related to, again, what you had said in terms of the India-Pakistan tensions. And we've seen in the past, especially during the Clinton administration, there was an attempt which Delhi was concerned about, which it called the G2 attempt of the US working with China to sort out a deal between India and Pakistan. That, of course, is not going to take place. But do you expect the Biden administration to put more pressure on both India and Pakistan, A, to begin a private back channel between the two governments, and B, to seek the start of an official level of talks between the two countries, though at the moment, both Delhi and Islamabad are averse to starting talks on basis of different factors. But do you think there'll be more pressure on both India and Pakistan to do this, to prevent some of the concerns that you rightly stated?
Yeah, as Ronnie said, great questions and not easy ones. You know, I want to just quickly take the opportunity to comment on some of the Afghanistan business, because the conversation has been so interesting and rich already. I just wouldn't want to miss the chance to observe that Zalmay Khalilzad, as an individual and as a diplomatic force, is still in place in the Biden administration, signaling a desire to continue, at least in the near term, with the approach that he was pursuing already, but also, I think, providing the Biden administration with an opportunity to effectively pick his brain on what is in the realm of the possible in terms of cutting a slightly modified version of the deal negotiated at Doha, and some of the other things that Ronnie and Husain have talked about. I think ultimately it comes down to those details in terms of what will be possible over the next few months. And I think that it's sometimes useful to remember just how important those interpersonal and detailed kinds of relationships actually are to figuring out what's possible. And so for me, sitting outside of that tiny circle of people around Zal, it's very hard to tell. But I will say it's going to be combined. That sort of, what does Zal think is possible, will be the first question. The second question the Biden administration will be asking is, just how bad is our counterterrorism posture if things go from bad to worse in Afghanistan? Because that's always been the driver in then Vice President Biden's view of Afghanistan and the region, and now President Biden's view will be, what threat does this pose to us through terrorism? And I think that they will be tempted, they will be, I'm sure, asking a lot of difficult questions about just how dangerous this is and is likely to get, with the observation that there are lots of other terrorist threats, not just in Afghanistan, and that taking a globalized approach to counterterrorism of a different sort may be the way to go. And then the last point will be, which kind of brings us back to where the two other panelists found themselves. Ultimately, this administration, like the past couple, is going to want to keep a lid on this problem and not let it explode in ways that are politically disastrous, and then also have a strategic consequence for refugee flows into the region and beyond in ways that we saw, for instance, in Syria. And so that will also be something that they keep in mind. So that's kind of a calculation on Afghanistan. To answer your question about how the Biden administration is going to balance its new concerns or its particular concerns about India, whether on climate, on trade, or on domestic politics, with respect to its strategic purpose with India? I think the answer there is a kind of a external, internal dialogue. So the difficult stuff, the Biden administration is, I think, almost certain to pursue quietly and in diplomatic terms behind closed doors. It is not going to make a spectacle of its concerns over India's human rights policies. It is not going to try to bring these fights out into the open. It's going to do the opposite, because it increasingly sees India as a friend and quasi-ally. And that, I think, the Biden administration believes is the way to deal with friends and quasi-allies. You don't air your dirty laundry in public. That will allow them to make pointed reference to these considerations. And I think their logic will run as follows. To their Indian counterparts, they will repeatedly suggest that India has the potential to be a special partnership, a special relationship. But that depends on India's own domestic political persuasion. And it's India's own decisions about to what extent it sees itself as a liberal democracy. Those considerations by India at home will affect whether or not India can unlock the door to that special partnership. But special partnership is not the only kind of partnership the United States and India could have. They could have simply an alliance or a relationship of convenience, a more transactional strategic relationship, which will also be important and which will continue to enable a variety of defense cooperation of the sort that we've already seen. In the same way that we have a defense-oriented cooperative relationship with Saudi Arabia and many other countries that are hardly democratic, and we've done that historically. So that's the kind of conversation I imagine they'll have in private. And then last, will the United States put more pressure on India and Pakistan with respect to their relationship? Not out of the gate. I don't anticipate that. Because as Ambassador Haqqani pointed out, South Asia isn't at the top of this administration's agenda out of the gate, and Pakistan isn't at the top of South Asia in terms of, and India, Pakistan are not at the top of the administration's South Asia agenda. So this is somewhere, this is a secondary, tertiary set of issues. In the fullness of the next 4 years, I imagine we will get to where you're describing. But given that neither India nor Pakistan is aching for that dialogue right now, the United States is certainly not looking to impose it. And there will be, as there have been in the past, always questions about how far the United States can push to recalcitrant players when neither of them really wants to see a normalization in their relationship. The United States doesn't want that peace more than they do, isn't going to put in more investment in that relationship than they are, and so has to be realistic about the prospects there.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to come in now. There are a couple of questions. The questions are not really directed at any particular speaker, so I'm just going to read out the questions and all of you can take turns in answering them briefly, and then we will have further discussions. The first one is focused on Pakistan and says, Pakistan's National Security Advisor has said that Pakistan does not want to be in any camp, quote unquote, Chinese or US, but wants to be a regional economic melting pot. The US and China can then be strategic partners with Pakistan. Is this a realistic expectation or wishful thinking? That's one question. And I've actually just read out to you verbatim. The second one is a longish comment, which, with apologies to the person who sent it, I'm going to not read out, but I will read out the question, which is something that all of you've covered in parts and in passing, but this is a very pointed question, which is, what is so different about Biden compared to all the previous US presidents and what they have done? This is especially true in the context that the US is now, or is it, several notches down in the global influence game, and China has commensurately gone up, and so might India in presumably in the region of South Asia. Thank you.
So let me try and attempt both questions, and then my colleagues can do them too. Economics has its own logic, and so it can't be, it's not a national security advisor or anybody who's responsible for national security who can actually decide that this is how economics will play out. If Pakistan wants to be some kind of economic melting pot, it actually has to have a functioning economy, an economy in which people want to invest. They invest for profits, and then they are able to repatriate those profits. We've seen that that's not happening. In fact, Pakistan has not been a great place for investment, especially for foreigners. There have been a spate of cases in which international arbitrators have given awards against Pakistan for violating contracts. It's not the first choice of investment destination for a lot of Western investors. So if Pakistan becomes economically a powerhouse, then obviously everybody would like to take advantage of it. So, the Chinese invest in Singapore, the Americans invest in Singapore, the Europeans invest in Singapore because they get a better return on investment. So we will have to see what Pakistan can accomplish in that regard. So far, it doesn't look very, shall we say, hopeful, the picture. China, on the other hand, is doubling down on its investments in Pakistan, and they're not investments, they are loans. The problem with loans is that they come due. When they come due, you have to pay them back. China's pattern so far in asking for loans back is a little harsh one. For example, in case of Hambantota in Sri Lanka, they said, well, we are going to take over the port because you're not servicing the debt. Pakistan may not like that. And I think that is the reason why Pakistan does not want to put all its eggs in China's basket, understandably so. But I think instead of saying it as a political statement, this is what we want, Pakistan has to demonstrate as an economic policy how it will become an economic destination that China, United States, Europeans, Arabs, everybody would like to invest in. And so let's see if that can happen. The second part of it was about the rising influence of others. Well, look, it's nice for all of us to say that 21st century is going to be an Asian century, but we must not forget the differences between China and India. India and China are far apart in terms of economic accomplishment. In terms of hard power, the United States is far ahead of China even today in terms of the military capabilities. So while the international order and international, shall we say, hierarchy of influence is changing, it hasn't fully changed. And as is often the case in such situations, nobody should start counting the chickens before they are hatched. Let's just wait for how things play out. Many things could go right for everyone, many things could go wrong. China itself could have problems. China could actually have problems in its own, maintaining its own economic growth, which is the key to its rise as a global power. But then again, when the numbers we are talking about, the rise and the fall is not going to be within days or weeks or months. It's going to take years. And the United States could actually have an economic rebound, which may make it put it in a better position to manage its global leadership than the previous few years have indicated. And India has a long way to go. I mean, I say to my Indian friends that you have celebrated your rise a bit prematurely. You have a lot of things to contend with. And yes, the whole world wants you to be China's competitor. The whole world, I mean, no great power in history has had so many other powers rooting for it as India does right now. And yet, it all depends on how they actually manage their own economy, how they manage their own rise. And if they do it right, then the Americans, the Europeans, the Japanese, the Australians will all be very happy to see a rising India compete with a rising China.
If I can just jump in to add a few words on this issue. I think, to put it quite bluntly, Pakistan is broke, right? When you look at the finances of Pakistan, it is really in a difficult position. It has borrowed, it's overborrowed. It had borrowed way too much already before the coronavirus pandemic hit, and the economy, of course, in Pakistan as well as others, has been badly hit. And as Ambassador Haqqani pointed out, China doesn't give grants, it gives loans that have to be serviced. And some of the investments, whether it's, the port in Gwadar port in Pakistan, or some of the roads, these have not borne economic dividends so far. So the question of, I think the tone I've heard from Pakistani friends and colleagues coming out, has changed quite a bit just compared to 5 years ago, where there was much enthusiasm about Chinese investments that were flowing everywhere, and were, everybody was trying to learn Chinese, and all this excitement. And then sort of the realization started hitting, hey, we're starting to face a quandary like Sri Lanka before us and others, where we're starting to have to pay back these loans, while having other loans to service, not only to China, and you need to produce in order to be able to pay back these loans. So Pakistan is in a very difficult position. Economy broke, and of course it wants to be sort of a crossroads, and trade with US and China and others, not one camp or the other. But for now, it needs to figure out how to get any investments into the country, because it's really in a very dire situation. On top of that, I think some of the recent political events, from the US perspective, the fact that the man accused of Daniel Pearl's murder, Omar Saeed Sheikh, has been essentially let go. I mean, he's sort of in a monitored house, as I understand it. But this is something that the US has objected to quite strongly. There's quite a bit of evidence, and that makes that relationship quite problematic when you have a Biden administration that wants to put the focus on human rights and democracy, et cetera. And yet, early on, the Biden administration is just in a couple weeks, and you have from the US's perspective, a proven murderer, gruesome beheading, and one of the key accused, where there was quite a bit of evidence, and he himself initially admitted to participating in the beheading, and this guy is let free, and quite a bit of worry in terms of how would that look if the US then engages more closely with Pakistan when these kind of issues have not been addressed. So I'm a little bit pessimistic. Of course, the world has seen an economic downturn due to the pandemic, and India and other countries have been quite hard hit also. And I think you're absolutely right, Ambassador Haqqani, that the Indian economy was on the downturn before the pandemic hit. So it will have to see how to get up to the growth rates that Modi promised when coming in. But it is financially in a much better position to engage with other countries than Pakistan is at the moment, which really limits the strategic options for Pakistan realistically.
If I could, I also wanted to chime in because the questions are very good. On the first issue, I agree with what has been said already, that Pakistan is in the category of more wishful thinking when it suggests that it'll be a geoeconomic hub for the region. However, it is, to be charitable at some level, it is encouraging to hear it as an aspiration. It is, I think, the correct aspiration, but it only comes true if Pakistan takes steps to actually change its policies, as Ambassador Haqqani pointed out. one quick story. Leaving the Lahore airport a couple of years ago, and I wrote about this in my recent book, I stopped outside because my ride was not there. I was surprised it was early hours of the morning. And what did I see but a small kiosk labeled China Security Desk with Chinese flags and an armed Pakistani guard standing in front. He was friendly enough and allowed me to sit there, even though I wasn't Chinese or Pakistani. But subsequently, I've been talking to Pakistani friends and saying, if you really want to encourage other outside international investors to feel comfortable in your country, you ought to have an international security desk rather than a China security desk. And that points at the specific issue about the China-Pakistan economic corridor. It is successful if it is the means to leverage and create an engine of growth that encourages other international investors and Pakistani investors to keep their money at home. Otherwise, it will never succeed. On Biden, what makes him different? Because that piece of the story hasn't been touched on yet. One thing is this moment in history may actually afford President Biden an opportunity and a strength, despite America's overall relative, you might say, weakness compared to where we were, say, 20 years ago. This is a moment of opportunity for a traditional, centrist, liberal president who can bring together that consensus in the United States and among international partners, not, as the Bush administration attempted to do, to advocate a freedom agenda of expanding democracy, and not, as the Obama administration attempted to do, to rein in that ambition, and not as the Trump administration effectively did by ignoring that ambition altogether and even denigrating it, but in defending democracy in states around the world where it is practiced, where it is appreciated, and where it needs defending, and where there's an audience for doing that. This is a tremendous political opportunity for this president that his immediate predecessors did not enjoy or did not perceive. And so that, I think, does make him different. And as long as he stays within those bounds of defending democracy where it has advocates, I think he has a strength, an untapped strength that should be appreciated.
Thank you. I have one additional question to all of you, the three panelists, and it'd be great if you could take this one by one. And the question is essentially this. I mean, you know, for a lot of people trying to understand the Biden administration and decision-making in terms of policy by the administration, we're sometimes confused as to the leverages of power, influence, you know, who calls the shots for South Asia in the US administration, which is the bureaucracy that is involved in it, who are the key players for this. So I'm wondering if you could really, you know, one by one, just give us a quick snapshot of who do you think is in charge of South Asia policy in the US administration, whether it's the NSC, whether it's the State Department, Pentagon, and some idea of the personality of people who are holding the key positions. I don't know who'd like to go first. Maybe Professor Dan Markey, you've served in previous administrations. Maybe you should go first, please.
Sure, I can jump in. Look, it's not been resolved yet. Not all of the positions are filled. South Asia, again, to reiterate the point that Ambassador Haqqani did make, is not the priority issue for this administration. And when you're not the priority issue, sometimes lesser lights within an administration will become powerful players because they'll scoop up the issue and they'll effectively be given a bit more autonomy to deal with it. But so far as we can tell, to this point, I mentioned Ambassador Khalil. On Afghanistan, he continues to hold the reins, not in terms of he doesn't have a wide latitude, but he knows where the skeletons are in terms of the process over the past 4 years. And he knows who's who and what's what. And so he continues to have a fair amount of control over the Afghanistan piece of that policy. On Asia, and in particular on China and Asia and where India fits into that, we should look first to the president himself, who does have views on these topics and has paid attention to these issues when he was in the Senate and then as vice president. Then we need to look to his kind of mind meld double over in the State Department in Tony Blinken, who is a trusted confidant and somebody who he's effectively and repeatedly said, when Tony says something, take it as my word. So see Tony Blinken as a power player there, but then see the convergence of Blinken at State, Jake Sullivan at the NSC, who also has worked closely with Blinken in the past, and Kurt Campbell, who will be the manager of the the Asia portfolio, and who brings a great deal of experience also from his time previously at State and elsewhere, working with India on the Indo-Pacific, the beginnings of the Indo-Pacific, the pivot or the rebalance to Asia, all of that, something he's quite familiar with. So these are the characters that you need to focus on. Notice that I haven't said the Defense Department quite so much. One of the things I'll be watching closely is to see whether the new Secretary of Defense will actually have as much of a policy-making role as prior Secretaries of Defense have. There's reason in my mind to anticipate that he will actually try to keep the Defense Department as a implementer agency more than a policy formulating agency intentionally, because the Defense Department has had so much weight in prior administrations. Perhaps the Biden administration will actually attempt to rein that in a bit and to return the policymaking power back to the State Department and the combination of the state and White House.
Let me just...
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rani, go ahead.
Are you sure?
Sure.
Okay, I just wanted to add to what Dan had said, that I think you're absolutely right, Dan, that under Biden, we're very likely to see emphasis, and we saw this by Biden going to the State Department, that diplomacy and foreign policy will indeed be made by the State Department and not by advisors with other portfolios in the White House or sort of in the Pentagon. So much more, I think we should be focusing on who will be sort of the next level of appointees, and that hasn't really happened yet in the State Department. But on the NSC, the Biden administration has announced that Simona Guha, a Indian American, has been appointed as the senior director for South Asia on the NSC, and essentially she's going to be succeeding the Trump administration's Lisa Curtis in the role. She is a seasoned South Asia hand. She is a former Foreign Service officer, a senior vice president at the Albright Stonebridge Group. She has worked on the India Business Council, State Department policy planning staff, and also has experience in Afghanistan. So I think with that appointment, we are seeing the point being made that you're getting senior people coming with really expertise in the particular area of South Asia, and a definition of South Asia that includes expertise from Afghanistan all the way east to Myanmar. So I'm quite hopeful that you will actually see a more thoughtful, more engaged, differentiated South Asia policy under the Biden administration. Thanks.
So let me just tell a story. Many, many years ago, when US-Pakistan relations were going through one of their low periods, I was part of a delegation that came to Washington, D.C. to try and see if we could get the issues at hand resolved. And our delegation, of course, as is often the case with South Asians, wanted to meet people of higher and higher rank. The Secretary of State at that time was James Baker. We obviously, although the person from our side heading the team was the was the chairman of the Senate, which in equivalence was the equal of the Vice President of the United States. we were given a meeting with the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, and then eventually a token meeting with the Deputy Secretary of State. As we were walking out, I learned a lesson that, of course, I was very young at that time, but I learned a lesson that has been very useful for me all these years. And the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, because at that time, the US did not have an Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia. It was a Assistant Secretary for Near East and South Asia. And South Asia for itself only had a Deputy Assistant Secretary, or a Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, as it was called in those days. And the person in question, the late Howard Schaefer, great scholar, great thoughtful person, he gave me a lesson. He says, look, the President of the United States pays very little attention to certain issues. The Secretary of State pays attention to a few more issues internationally than the President, but then their docket has certain things based on priority. And so come to terms with the reality that right now, I am it. And that is the level at which you will be dealt with. So my point being that the presidential priorities being what they are, the Secretary of State's priorities, I think Dan Markey has very nicely and very clearly articulated the way the decisions are going to be made in this administration. It's going to be a more process administration than the previous one. The previous one was a whim or a whimsical administration. Once the president had tweeted, that tweet sometimes superseded dozens and dozens and dozens of pages of policy memos that were going around. I don't think that'll happen. There will be a process, but most South Asian matters will probably be dealt with at the Assistant Secretary of State level, an Assistant Secretary that has yet to be named, and the Senior Director at the NSC level, a person that has been named and is known for her abilities and competence. I agree with Dan. The Department of Defense will back off a little bit this time in terms of policy making and focus more on policy implementation. The arena for decision making will be the State Department and the National Security Council, and the two of them will operate with less time demands on the topmost people, but more on the operational level people who will be a little more empowered than their predecessors.
Over to Nilanjan.
Thank you very much. Taking cue from what Husain Haqqani said, I'd be loath to say I am it, but I'm afraid that is it. Thank you very much. This has been absolutely fantastic, and this is exactly what we want to achieve through this series, especially the fact that that I mentioned very briefly in passing when we began this event, is that the geopolitics and the geostrategy of South Asia at the moment, the region, has so much that is outside the traditional understanding of the region that determines what is happening in the region, whether it is China, which has never been seen traditionally as part of South Asia, or it is Iran, or it is Africa, or all these sorts of things. And this particular event focused on the United States and how we may expect the dynamics to work and to change in this new administration. To answer a couple of questions that are there on Facebook. One is, yes, there will be a recording of this available on our website from next week. And the other is that there will also be a print version of this, a working paper, which will be published and be available free to download in about 3 months from now. The previous one, a previous event of ours in the last term, which focused on China, will also become available later in February. So please do look out for that. Our next event in this series is on the 6th of May, and will focus on the ever interesting topic of Kashmir. And we hope that all of you will be able to join us. Please do subscribe to our mailing list. Before we sign off, it is my very pleasant duty and very heartfelt to thank all the panelists. This has been absolutely so exciting. Husain Haqqani from the Hudson Institute, Daniel Markey from Johns Hopkins University, Rani Mullen from the College of William and Mary, and of course, Rahul Roy Chaudhary from IISS, and my colleagues at LSE IDEAS, in collaboration with whom we are doing this event. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.